Welcome back to the channel. I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist, and in today's video, I am giving you 5 quarterbacks who present you with way more upside than where their current ADP suggests. Please remember to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. The first player on this list is Cleveland Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson. So at 6'2", 221, he has a solid build, even though he's a little bit on the short side for being a quarterback. But he's still only 28.9 years old, so he should have at least a couple more seasons in him. With a 4.66 40-yard dash, that puts him in the 84th percentile among quarterbacks, so well above 50th percentile. He has a speed score of 116.4, which puts him in the 74th percentile among quarterbacks. And he has an 11.26 agility score, which puts him in the 75th percentile among quarterbacks. So a very, very solid athlete. These numbers might be not quite as good nowadays, considering he's no longer 21 years old, but he's still an above-average athlete for a quarterback nonetheless, and he's going off the board as the QB 22 in redraft or the 1503. I think this is a very solid value. This guy has tons of rushing upside. He hasn't realized it the past couple of seasons due to his allegations and a couple injuries sustained the past 2 seasons, but that's why he presents himself as a potential value for you at QB 22. Really, you're in the 15th round. You are really just looking for any upside that you can find. As the 22nd overall quarterback coming off the board, he has way more upside than the other quarterbacks in this general range. I mean, quarterbacks like Baker Mayfield, Aaron Rodgers, Matt Stafford, players like that are going ahead of him, and he's going just above players like J.J. McCarthy, Will Levis, Geno Smith, Drake May. Some players like Drake May do have a lot of upside. It's just, when are they going to start? J.J. McCarthy also has a good amount of upside. It's just, how many starts is he going to have? I think the potential of Deshaun Watson is well above that, theoretically, of Baker Mayfield, Aaron Rodgers, Matt Stafford, and Kirk Cousins this season. Because while, yes, they're much better passers than him, the rushing upside presents such a baked-in floor that it's really hard to be that much better of a passer to make up that rushing difference. When we look at a situation, his running back, Nick Chubb, is coming off yet another devastating knee injury. It was absolutely gruesome. Minkah Fitzpatrick absolutely destroyed his knee. Reports have been positive about him, but we're not really sure exactly when he'll be back and how effective he'll be. They do have Jerome Ford behind him and Dante Foreman, pending his health after sustaining a head injury on a kick return. So they should have a decent backfield. But as far as his wide receiver 1, Amari Cooper is very underrated. So Amari Cooper is one of those players that's not consistent necessarily on a week-to-week basis, but he has a crazy ceiling. It wouldn't shock you at all if he got you 40 points or more in any given week, and he has the potential to get 50 or more in a game as well. Then they traded for Jerry Jeudy. He's been a very mid wide receiver. You'd prefer it if he was your wide receiver 3, but maybe a change of scenery will help him out. He's a very good route runner. It just hasn't translated into a good stat line for him, but to be fair to him, the quarterback play was also just disgusting for him early in his career. Then you have Elijah Moore, who in his rookie season was looking fantastic. Then the Jets drafted Garrett Wilson. He was angry about that, and so he asked to be traded and was a locker room issue. So now he's in Cleveland. We'll see if he can step up as a wide receiver 3. And David Njoku, admittedly, while it was with Joe Flacco, really broke out this past season. So maybe he'll be able to continue that with Deshaun Watson. But overall, it's a really solid supporting cast. It could definitely be worse. I mean, you could look to the Giants as an example. They basically have Malik Neighbors, Devin Singletary, and maybe Theo Johnson at tight end. That's probably just about the worst set of skill position players there is. So this definitely is better than that, but it could be better. But when we look at their team pass plays per game and pace of play, they finished 5th in team pass plays per game with 36.8. I expect this to potentially remain about the same because while you would think they have a great defense, right, and that they would want to run, they may not be able to because we don't know how healthy Nick Chubb's going to be. Jerome Ford isn't anything special at running back. He's fine. And Dante Foreman is just a big bruising power back, but he's also dealt with injury history. So they may be forced to pass whether or not they want to, but their pace of play was 6th in the NFL this past season. So why we like this is it allows more potential for fantasy points for Deshaun Watson. If they were taking up as much of the clock as possible and just running the entire time, it would obviously limit his upside, but with them ranking in the top 5 this past season in pass plays per game and among the leaders in pace of play, this is going to set him up for more opportunities to get you fantasy points. Then when we look at his rushing upside, because remember, that provides you with a fantastic floor on a week-to-week basis. In his rookie year, he had 269 yards on the ground and 2 touchdowns. Then he had 551 and 5 touchdowns, 413 yards and 7 touchdowns, 444 yards and 3 touchdowns. Then didn't do anything in 2021. In 2022, when he came back, he only had 175 and 1 touchdown. But that was only in 6 games. So he probably would have been around the 400-yard mark and maybe another touchdown or 2. And then once again, in 6 games this past season, he had 142 yards and another rushing touchdown. So a little bit over 300 or around 400 yards potentially and another 2 to 3 touchdowns on the ground. So on a per-game basis, he provides you with a fantastic rushing floor. In fact, this past season, he was 15th in rushing yards per game with 23.7. So that would have put him at right under 403 total rushing yards on the season. At QB22, he has way more upside than that, and he has the potential upside to be a high-end QB2 for you, and you don't have to draft him there. The second player on this list is Washington Commanders quarterback Jayden Daniels. So he's listed at 6'4", 210 pounds. I do suspect his actual playing weight is closer to 200 pounds because while this is a verified weight, he didn't run, suggesting that he may have drank a little bit of water to help fill out his frame a little bit. But he was still nonetheless picked 2nd overall out of LSU. And he is a little bit old for a rookie quarterback. He's 23.6 years old. But in the grand scheme of things, being 23.6 years old obviously it's not as though he's elderly and going to retire or anything. He's still a young enough prospect to where his age doesn't concern me. And one thing I really wish he would have done is a 40-yard dash, but he refrained from doing so. But in high school, he ran a verified 4.50 40-yard dash, which puts him in the 100th percentile for a high school athlete. And he had a 68th percentile speed score based off of that in high school. It's fair to expect that he would probably run low 4.4s based on his ability to pull away from defenders in college, just like Anthony Richardson was able to do in his collegiate career. They're probably right around the same speed, so this does present him with a lot of rushing upside. And he's going off the board as a QB 15 at the 10.06. This just might be one of the best values in your drafts because this guy has absolute overall QB1 upside. You're going to see a couple of stats here that are going to show you just how much upside this guy really has. I will say one thing to worry about for his career is being a Washington Commander. It's a historically dysfunctional franchise, repetitive coaching changes, no stability of any kind, but for 2024 fantasy football, you don't give a crap about that, to be honest. Looking at his situation, obviously he's going to be the starting quarterback. It's already been announced. His competition is Marcus Mariota. Let's be real, there's no threat there. Anyways, they brought in Austin Eckler to be a good receiving back. I will say, though, that Jayden Daniels rarely passes to his running backs, so I'm not sure if this will continue because in college, a lot of times what he'd do is if his first read wasn't open, and one caveat to this is LSU generally runs an offense where you don't have full field reads. You have a first and second read on one side of the field. So it could be coaching and scheme dependent here, and it could be a little misleading potentially. But what I've seen on film is that if his first read wasn't open, a lot of the times what he would do is immediately see if there was a rushing lane available. Sometimes he'd go through a couple more progressions before doing so. But while that could impact his longevity in the NFL, for the 2024 season, that's going to get you a lot of fantasy points if he's able to stay healthy. Then they still have Brian Robinson Jr. He's a very underrated power back. They have wide receiver 1 Terry McLaurin. He has always been an underrated wide receiver. He's just never had anybody to throw him the ball. As a matter of fact, Jacoby Brissett was probably one of the better quarterbacks he's had in his career. Then they have Jahan Dotson. He's fine. You'd prefer that he was your wide receiver 3 or 4, but it could definitely be worse than him. They drafted Luke McCaffrey. We'll see if he's any good. He's coming out of Rice as a rookie. He projects to be more of a slot receiver or Z. He's not going to beat press coverage very well. He's very lanky and skinny. Diami Brown isn't really anything, neither is Zacchaeus, and Jamison Crowder used to be good, but we haven't really seen very much out of him. He is on the older side of being a receiver. Then they have Zach Ertz at tight end. He's a little bit past the hill. Trey McBride kicked him out of town in Arizona this past season. Then they did draft Ben Sinnott out of Kansas State. He is a very good athlete for a tight end. I think he is going to develop into something. Whether or not it's this year, it remains to be seen. But overall, definitely a fine supporting cast. Their offensive line, however, is absolutely atrocious. So I do worry about him and his pass protection. But the good news is he does have the mobility to be able to escape the rush. Looking at a couple of advanced stats, excluding sacks, he had 130 carries for 1,192 yards this past season at 9.2 yards per carry. Those are Lamar Jackson type of numbers as a rusher. And he had 10 touchdowns as well. He had an avoided tackle rate of 34.3% in 2023 and an explosive rush rate of over 25%. Both of those numbers were top 2 in the FBS this past season. That helps paint a picture of a dynamic running quarterback that has potentially the highest overall rushing upside in the NFL. There's definitely arguments for Anthony Richardson, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, players like that, but it shouldn't shock anybody for him to be mentioned in this conversation. Then among the top 5 prospects of Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy, and Penix, Daniels was first in yards per attempt, 11.7. That was tops in the FBS this past season. Then his touchdown rate of 12.2% was also best in the FBS. That is partially because he had Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors, but you still have to be able to get it to the guys. It doesn't matter if they're open if you're not capable of doing that, so still props to him in that regard. And his average depth of target of 10.2 is also number 1. He was also second highest in off-target rate with 10.1%, completion rate with 72.2%, and second best in interception rate of 1.22%. So he's not turnover prone either, which is a very good thing. Turnovers are one of the deaths of rookie quarterbacks. So all in all, this is a quarterback that has 1,000-plus yard rushing upside, and at the QB 15 is a tremendous potential value for you. It shouldn't shock you if he could be the quarterback 1, or at least a top 5 fantasy quarterback for you in 2024 specifically. The third player on this list is Bears rookie quarterback Caleb Williams. So at 6'1", 214 pounds, he definitely has the build of a larger Kyler Murray. He is very, very built, so he doesn't have a slight frame for you to worry too much about injuries. He really hasn't dealt with injuries that much. He was drafted first overall to the Bears in this draft, and he's only 22.7 years old. And he isn't early declared despite being 22.7, so that is one thing he obviously has going for him. He did not run a 40-yard dash in the combine. He elected out of that. But we've seen on tape that this guy is absolutely a 4.5 speed quarterback, if not slightly lower than that. if I had to guess, he's probably around a 4.48 to 4.52 speed quarterback, which is absolutely dangerous in the running game. As verified in high school, at least, he had a 4.56 40-yard dash, which gives him a 97.1 speed score, which is size-adjusted athleticism, specific to speed. And he's going in redraft as the QB 12 at the 905. I think, given his situation and how highly regarded as a prospect he is, this is a very good value for you. This guy has some of the best pocket awareness I've ever seen in a prospect. He can see things from all over the field behind him. He knows naturally where to go to beat the rush. He extends plays with the best of them. He has a top 5 arm in the NFL. And now, that is pure arm talent. He can put the ball anywhere he wants on the field. He can do it on the run. He doesn't need a good base. He can make jumping throws. He has ridiculous torque. He is one of the most accurate rookie quarterbacks we've seen in recent memory. And this guy has Patrick Mahomes' ability to extend plays, find weird arm angles. He can throw it over his head, lob it up, sidearm it, see things across the field, which is perilous because he has the most confidence of anybody I've ever seen at quarterback. But he also has the Aaron Rodgers pocket presence to see things all over behind him, know where to step up. It's crazy. And he has Kyler Murray level rushing ability. And you're going to see, given his supporting cast, as well as his absolute peak potential, why QB 12 at the 905 is a solid value for you in your 2024 drafts. Looking at his supporting cast, it is among the best in the NFL. DeAndre Swift is fine as an actual running back in terms of being a runner of the football, but he's an above-average pass catcher at running back. So while Caleb Williams generally hasn't passed to running backs at that high of a rate, Marshawn Lloyd was also the best receiving back he's had, and he's good in his own right, but he definitely wouldn't be classified as a weapon in the passing game. But DeAndre Swift is capable of being that, but that's not all. He has DJ Moore, who was just signed to an extension, which doesn't matter for 2024 fantasy football because he was already under contract. But that's a solid wide receiver 1. But this guy has 3 wide receiver 1s on his team. They traded for Keenan Allen. He's going to be fantastic. By the way, DJ Moore is going to be generally used at the Z position, but he has absolute positional versatility at the X, Y, and Z. Then, like I was about to say, they traded a 4th-round pick for Keenan Allen. He's going to be generally used in the slot at the Y, but he can be used as a Z receiver. You generally want to use him in motion to give him free releases because he doesn't really possess the speed to beat press coverage and be a quick threat after the snap in that regard, but he's still a fantastic wide receiver. Then you have Rome Odunze, who has absolute positional versatility. He was drafted inside the top 10 picks, 9th overall specifically. He's going to be generally their X wide receiver on the line of scrimmage because he is crazy. He will destroy press coverage. He's a threat downfield. He's going to be the deep threat generally for this team, but he can win on any level of the field. Matt Harmon, who is an expert at wide receiver evaluations, gave him the first all-green route chart in terms of success by route since he started doing them, at least for a rookie prospect. That's how good Rome Odunze is. So like I said, he has 3 wide receiver 1s on one team. Then they have Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett at tight end. Very solid players at their respective positions. So overall, he has one of the better supporting casts. Then they have bookend tackles on each side to help protect him. And when we look at his rushing production and his passing touchdown versus interception production in college, it's incredible. When we look at his freshman year, he had 21 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions, and 438 rushing yards. Then in his Heisman-winning season as a sophomore, he had 42 touchdowns to only 5 picks with 382 yards on the ground. And this past season, he had 30 passing touchdowns to still only 5 interceptions and 115 rushing yards on the ground. But in 2 of those 3 seasons, he had 10 or more rushing touchdowns. So Yes, while he doesn't have the rushing upside of Jaden Daniels, he has a tremendous amount of rushing upside in his own right. And he absolutely could be, if he hits his ceiling, Patrick Mahomes. A mixture, or really an Aaron Rodgers with more mobility. This past season with 30 touchdowns and 5 picks is a down season for him. Most college prospects would dream to have that production as their peak season. When we look at the advanced stats, though, in the red zone, this is where he compares a lot to Aaron Rodgers in that they don't make mistakes very often in the red zone specifically. He completed 67.3% of his throws with a 25.45 touchdown rate, and only 7.3% of his throws were deemed as off target. His touchdown rate was not the best among the Big Five, which was Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, J.J. McCarthy, and Michael Penix. But he was not intercepted one single time in the red zone. And he's only been intercepted one time in the red zone in his entire collegiate career. This is going to greatly influence the efficiency in which the Bears have in the red zone and is going to lead to more points scored for them and thus more touchdowns specifically for this offense, which, considering DeAndre Swift isn't a big bruising back and Roschon Johnson, who would be their power back, isn't a tremendous running back really, they're going to generally want to run more with Caleb Williams in the red zone, which he's been incredibly efficient with. And he's going to obviously be effective in terms of passing the ball because Rome Odunze is more than likely going to be his favorite red zone target. He's a little bit over 6'3", over 210 pounds. I think it was 212 to be specific, with a 4.45 40-yard dash. He's one of my favorite wide receiver prospects we've seen in quite some time. I do have him as the wide receiver 3 of this class, but make no mistake, Rome Odunze would be the wide receiver 1 in a good majority of the drafts we've seen. And really, since 2020, I would have probably had Rome Odunze or CeeDee Lamb as wide receiver 1 that season. Nobody knew Justin Jefferson was going to be as good. Then in 2021, I would have had Jamar Chase a little bit over him, but he would have been wide receiver 2. In 2022, I would have easily had Rome Odunze over Drake London. In 2023, he would have been by far the wide receiver 1. And he's really not that much worse than Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Nabers in my estimation. He's just not as explosive as Malik Nabers and not quite as technically refined as Marvin Harrison Jr., but still fantastic nonetheless. But getting back to Caleb Williams, among the Big Five prospects mentioned this past season, he was second best in off-target rate at only 10.1%. That's his ability to make the majority, about 90% of his throws, on target, which lends credence to my claim earlier as him having the elite arm talent to generally be accurate across the field. He was also second in yards per attempt with 9.4, meaning he doesn't just dink and dunk all the time. He does threaten the field vertically, which is critical if you're going to be able to make big plays in the NFL. And his touchdown rate of 7.7% was also second. He was third in completion rate with a 68.6% there, and at rate of passes with 20-plus air yards at 16.9%, which also lends credence to the claim that he is going to be a vertical threat for defenses in the passing game. His 1.29% interception rate is also third lowest among the class. So while he does attempt throws down the field, he's generally intelligent in his selection of passes. He also had the lowest average depth of target at just 8.5 yards. But overall, this guy's set up for a fantastic rookie season. It shouldn't shock anybody if he has a Stroud level or better season. And I just think his fantasy finish is going to be better than Stroud's because he has a lot more rushing upside than C.J. Stroud. His QB12 overall draft slot is a good value for you, and it shouldn't shock anybody if he finishes inside the top 10. The fourth player on this list is Arizona Cardinals quarterback Kyler Murray. Sitting at 5'10", 207, he is a thick quarterback in terms of his build, but he is a little bit on the shorter side. He was a former 101 pick in 2019, and he's still only 27 years old, so it's not as if he's elderly and about to retire or anything. He still has every bit of his athleticism in which he had as a rookie, in my estimation, currently. And he ran a 4.49 40-yard dash, which puts him in one of the highest percentiles among quarterbacks because generally quarterbacks have 4.6 or worse speed. It's very rare for a quarterback to run in the 4.4s and especially the 4.3s. And when we look at where he's going in redraft, he's going as the QB9 at the 7-11. One fun fact about him, he was on pace in terms of points per game to finish as the QB6, coming fresh off an ACL tear. So, considering everything's gotten better for him and there's nothing worse about his situation, it's a little bit surprising to me that he's being pushed down to the QB9 and players such as Joe Burrow are going ahead of him, considering Joe Burrow's injury history in which he just had. So you would think there would be some recency bias there. And the fact that Joe Burrow has one of the lowest rushing floors among all quarterbacks, really. Him, C.J. Stroud, and then some of the older quarterbacks. So I think QB9 is going to be a tremendous value, and here's why. When we look at their depth chart, obviously Kyler Murray is the starter at quarterback, but then they have James Conner at running back, and they drafted Trey Benson at the top of the 3rd round. So either way, they're going to, unless both get hurt obviously, have a very solid running back to help him in the running game, to help things be balanced so that it's not all on his shoulders, but also to help increase the efficiency due to the threat of a running game. Then they have Marvin Harrison Jr., one of the best prospects we've seen in recent memory. He's my wide receiver 1, which isn't shocking or anything. That's general consensus view, but there's a reason it's a consensus view. He's one of the cleanest route runners we've seen in some time coming out of college. The 6'3", generational bloodline. So he's going to be their X-wide receiver. He's going to fill the DeAndre Hopkins role for them. He does have positional versatility, though, although I just expect him to be isolated in general in this offense because looking at the rest of their receiver core, at least, he's the only wide receiver that I would trust to beat one-on-one coverage on a consistent basis. Then they have Michael Wilson. He looked okay as a rookie. He showed some flashes, but I don't really think he's going to be too much for them. Then they have Greg Dortch. He's a small slot receiver. He's going to be the Rondale Moore for them, so we'll see about his production. But not the best receiving core besides, obviously, Marvin Harrison Jr. being their wide receiver 1. But then we get to Trey McBride. He is one of the better tight ends in the league. And in fact, since he stepped foot as a starter in, I believe it was week 8 of this past season, from the time he set foot as the starter for the Cardinals, once they shipped out Zach Ertz to the end of the season, he was the tight end 1 over Sam Laporta, despite the overall finish difference between them. So, pro tip, Trey McBride is a fantastic tight end to own, and I would try to get him on my team if you can, especially if you're in a tight end premium league or a 2 tight end league. He is going to be absolutely fantastic for you. Then when we look at his rushing upside, he has a ton of rushing upside. In his rookie season, he had 544 yards and 4 touchdowns. Then in his second season, he really stepped it up with 819 yards and 11 touchdowns, both career highs for him. His third season, it came down a little bit, but he had 423 and 5 on the ground, then 418 and 3, and that was in part of a season as well. He only played 11 games before sustaining that ACL tear, and then coming off the ACL tear, he had 244 yards and 3 touchdowns. That would have been over 500 yards on the ground and maybe another touchdown or 2, possibly 3. So you could have projected around 500 yards and 5 touchdowns if he played a full season. But why this matters is it was coming off the ACL tear. He's first of all likely to be healthier, but then second of all, still an effective rusher even if he doesn't get back to the point in which he was before this ACL tear. He has tremendous upside. Then when we look at his carries, his 44 carries, despite only playing in 8 games, was good for 16th in the NFL. His 5.5 carries per game were 10th in the NFL. His 13 red zone carries, despite not playing most of the season, were good for 13th. His red zone carries of 1.6 were good for 7th in the NFL. His total rushing yards were still 13th. and his rushing yards per game were at 30.5, were good for ninth in the entire NFL. And despite only playing in 8 games, his 3 rushing touchdowns were good for 12th. So, he was the QB6 on a fantasy points per game basis before having Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey Benson invited into this offense to go along with James Conner and Trey McBride. He has a tremendous floor and much more upside now, and it's to the point now where you really shouldn't be shocked if he could be the QB1 overall. His QB9 price tag is an absolute value and a smash for me in 2024 drafts. And the final player on this list is Colts quarterback Anthony Richardson. If you've watched my videos, you know my undying love for this man. If he just can stay healthy, which we cannot predict injuries, and all you care about is one season of health. For dynasty purposes, you absolutely do have to be worried that he may not be able to progress for you and be a long-term starter. But for 2024, it's his job. So he's 6'4", 244 pounds. He was picked 4th overall this past season, and he's still only 22.2 years old. This guy doesn't have that many total games in his collegiate and professional career played. So his upside is absolutely untapped. He is nowhere near his level of potential upside. His 4.43 40-yard dash is in the 99th percentile, as well as his 135.4 burst score, which is his vertical and broad jump combined, is also in the 99th percentile. This guy is the best athlete we have ever seen at the quarterback position. He's going off the board at QB6, which I think is a very fair value, but he absolutely has the upside to easily be the QB1 overall. He's going off the board at the 5'10 as well, so it's not as if you're having to select him in the top 3 rounds, and if he were to bust, it would certainly kill your chances of winning. He's going off the board essentially at the end of the 5th or beginning of the 6th round, where if you were to miss a little bit of time, you would still more than likely be able to be okay, especially if you do get a backup with some upside later. But this guy is in a fantastic scheme with one of the best play-calling head coaches in Shane Steichen. This guy has been behind the breakouts of Justin Herbert and Jalen Hurts, so Anthony Richardson is in absolutely fantastic hands here in Indy. And here is why I believe he has the overall QB1 potential. Looking at the Colts depth chart, Anthony Richardson is their quarterback, and their running back in Jonathan Taylor is one of the better running backs in the league. He's dealt with injuries and did hold out this past season, so his overall finishes haven't been as good. But he was absolutely dominant in 2021, and I think he's going to return to dominance this season. So he has a solid running game to fall back on, and he has tremendous rushing upside in his own right. Then they have Michael Pittman Jr., who's a big Z for them. He's generally used as Z, he can be used in the slot, and he can be used as an X wide receiver, but they generally like to give him free releases so he doesn't have to beat press coverage. Then he has Josh Downs, who at 5'9", 171 is the prototypical, in today's age at least, slot receiver. He's very good against man coverage. He was inside the top 10 in success rate there as a rookie, and also, I believe, in the top 10 in contested catch rate as a rookie. So once again, a fantastic third down option and short area option for Anthony Richardson. Then they drafted A.D. Mitchell at the end of the 2nd round to be a vertical threat at X for them. So overall, these 3 wide receivers complement each other incredibly well. Their tight end room with Jelani Woods or Kylan Granson is fine. They should be solid options in the red zone. But the thing is, with the fantastic play calling by Shane Steichen, he is going to get the most out of these people and use them to their strengths. So besides the fact that this is a good depth chart, it's going to be used to the best of its ability. Another fun fact, out of 49 QBs this past season with 90-plus dropbacks, Anthony Richardson was the highest scoring in fantasy points per dropback with 0.73. He was also a top 4 quarterback in 2 of his 4 starts, and in the one start in which he wasn't, he played about a third of the snaps and had over 17 fantasy points. This guy is going to be a dominant force for you in fantasy football. Another fun fact, he was on pace to break the rushing touchdown record. He was on pace for 1 touchdown a game, which, if he had played the entire season, would have given him 17, which would have broken the record of 15 set by Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts this past season. So he has absolutely massive rushing touchdown upside. When we look at a couple of advanced stats here, his 6.3 carries per game was 8th in the NFL among quarterbacks. His 8 total red zone carries was 20th, and that's despite only playing 4 games. Then his red zone carries per game at 2.0 was good for 3rd in the NFL. His 136 rushing yards, despite only playing 4 games, was good for 27th in the NFL. So he was on pace for right around 540 rushing yards in the season and 17 rushing touchdowns. His 34.0 rushing yards per game was also 5th in the NFL, and his 4 rushing touchdowns gave him the 7th most in the NFL, and that's still only playing 4 games. So while yes, he's relatively unproven and it was a small sample size, this guy has by far the most upside, I think, of any of these quarterbacks I've mentioned. And if he's able to hit his max upside, he should easily be the number 1 quarterback, and it shouldn't be remotely close. Because another thing, he actually has very good pocket awareness and a fantastic arm, even though his accuracy isn't quite the best. Think early career Josh Allen in that regard. But unlike Josh Allen, he almost never turns the ball over. In 4 games of playing, he only had 2 turnovers, 1 lost fumble, and 1 interception. He is a very safe quarterback, and that he's going to keep the offense rolling, admittedly with the help of the masterful play calling of Shane Steichen. But this is going to be one of the most efficient offenses in the NFL, and if everyone can stay healthy, should be among the top 5 in terms of total offense. Draft this guy, and it shouldn't shock you if he finishes as the QB1 overall, and by a good margin, should he hit his upside. So in review, the 5 quarterbacks mentioned here that have massive upside to well outproduce their ADP are Cleveland Browns quarterback Deshaun Watson. Remember that before his allegation-riddled season and the past 2 injury-riddled seasons, he was right around a top 5 quarterback, and he absolutely has every bit of that rushing upside. He was on pace for around 300 to 400 rushing yards this past season and about 3 rushing touchdowns on the ground, which given his QB22 price tag, if he can stay healthy, he's going to well outproduce that and could be a high-end QB2 for you, which given his ADP is a massive value for you. And he's going off the board at the 1403. So if you really want to wait for a quarterback, he is one of the better ones that could well outproduce his ADP. The next player mentioned was Washington Commanders quarterback Jaden Daniels. He has crazy rushing upside, similar to that of Lamar Jackson. He's being drafted as the QB15 overall at the 1005, so once again, a fantastic value. His weapons around him are Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, Ben Sinnott, Austin Eckler. And while he might not be the best quarterback in terms of longevity, because while it could be scheme dependent, on film, there is a lot of after first read not working, running automatically, and not really looking from read to read. I do think he's capable of that, and I have seen some of that on film, so we'll see if that affects his longevity. But for 2024 purposes, he possesses crazy upside, and it shouldn't shock anybody if he massively outproduces this QB15 price tag. Then we have Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears, who's going off the board at the 905 as the QB12. He has Patrick Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers-like traits. He has one of the top 5 arms in the NFL in terms of where he can place the ball and his actual arm strength. Look at his highlights. They're ridiculous. He goes into the best situation I've ever even heard of for a number 1 overall pick. He has 3 wide receiver ones on his team, 2 solid tight ends, and a solid pass-catching running back with 2 bookend tackles. And he had 10-plus rushing touchdowns in 2 of his 3 collegiate seasons. And generally, his highest amount of picks thrown in a season was 5 twice. And he had over 40 touchdowns in 1 season, and in his down season had 30. So he has crazy upside that's similar to that of Patrick Mahomes. So with his fantastic prospect profile and situation, it shouldn't shock anybody if he massively outproduces this QB12 ADP, even as a rookie. Then we have Kyler Murray. He was on pace to be the QB6 on a fantasy points per game basis this past season. He's being drafted at the QB 9. Take advantage of this. What did they done since this past season? Well, I don't know. They drafted Marvin Harrison Jr. and drafted Trey Benson to help the running game out. They're going to need to throw the ball a lot because they were second worst in points allowed by defenses this past season, and they're really not going to be any better this season. In fact, their defense just got a little bit worse with this BJ Ojulari injury. Really, take advantage of this because he has overall QB1 upside, and it shouldn't shock anybody if he's generally right around QB 5 to 8. And finally, we have Anthony Richardson. He led the league in fantasy points per dropback with 0.73, was on pace to break the rushing touchdown record of 15 by Allen and Hurts with 17 himself. He was also going to have over 500 total rushing yards on the season if his per-game averages continued. He has one of the best coaches in the game calling plays for him in a fantastic offense that all complements each other. It shouldn't shock anyone if he finishes as a QB1 and by a large margin should he be able to stay healthy. But what do you think? Do you think these players are values at their ADP? Do you disagree with me? Please let me know in the comment section, and specifically let me know why. Who do you think are values at their current ADP? Let me know in the comments section. With that being said, I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist, your NFL breaking news source, and the dynasty and redraft implications behind said breaking news. I am building a library of information with which you can use to dominate your fantasy leagues in 2024 and beyond. Please remember to like and subscribe. It would mean the absolute world to me. Thank you and have a good day.